Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. Now let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Welcome to the next episode of our Better Events Podcast. This week we're going to be tackling fundraising event strategies for nonprofits. I'm Logan Clements. I'm a freelance event producer out of Seattle, Washington. I'm joined by Mary Davidson. A little more about me. I work as a virtual event producer now, but also an in-person one once in-person events are back. I love helping clients create fun and engaging events while also doing them more efficiently. Normally they are sporting events that I work at, but I also do work with nonprofits as well as corporations and universities and all different kinds of clients, but love anything and everything related to events, especially in the event production area. Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Logan. My name is Mary Davidson, and my business is EP Events, E as events, P as in purpose, and my focus is on fundraising events, although like Logan, that has looked like virtual events this year, and then Logan and I have also had the opportunity to partner on some fun events this year as well. But in short, I would say that fundraising events are my jam, and I am excited to be able to chat a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to essentially interview Mary about this topic. I have some experience as well with fundraising and nonprofit clients, but I know, Mary, you have lived in this world, so I'm very excited to kind of get your key insights. You want to kind of share what are our big things that we're going to talk about today when it comes to fundraising?
Yeah, definitely. So there's 4 things that we hope to cover today, and this is for, if you're a nonprofit organization, a foundation, maybe a political fundraising group, a board member, or an event planner. So lots of people, this episode is for you. So we are going to share first, how to get started planning your fundraiser. Second, what kind of fundraising event to do. Third, strategies to implement during your event to maximize funds raised and hearts touched. And fourth, are fundraising events the best way to raise money? So,
and as always, we will end with a bonus tip at the end.
Always, yes. Can't forget the bonus tip.
Well, we can kind of kick off with tackling that first one, like what is the biggest challenge when it comes to fundraising events? Again, I think if you want to listen back to our episode 2 about your North Star and knowing your why, I think sometimes the biggest challenge with fundraising events is people get bogged down with all the shoulds of what they should be doing with their event or what a fundraiser, everyone in their brain looks like. And that kind of will give them blinders to some of the cool and different ideas that you can do, that there's not just one way to have a fundraising event. There's so many different ways and so many ways that might not even apply to what you want to do. So you don't want to get distracted with the ones that don't apply to your segment. But I think that's kind of the biggest challenge, is getting stuck in the shoulds of what you've either done in the past as an organization or what you see other people doing. Mary, what do you think? What do you think the biggest challenge is?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good one. I was thinking through this, and I think one of the biggest challenges is getting the attendees at your fundraising event to give, so to donate. Because you hope that your event is going to be engaging enough and your program is going to be impactful enough that it will influence your attendees to actually give at the event. But it's a challenge when you plan, for your expenses and your revenue for the event. You do hope that people give, but you can't always guarantee it. And so just a quick note on that to dive a little bit deeper. I have heard some organizers in the past say that if an attendee for a fundraiser doesn't give, then they're kind of just like a seat in the chair for the event. And I think what they mean by this is that there's sort of an expectation with fundraising events that if you attend, that you donate live at the event. But I don't think I would necessarily call them just a seat in the chair, because if nothing else, those people are becoming more educated about your organization, which alone is super important. And who knows, also later on, they might just be waiting, kind of vetting your organization a little bit more. Maybe later on they'll make a gift when they're in that circumstance to be able to do so. But you never know. So you really have to nail down that purpose of your event, which is what we talked about in episode 2, and implement some giving strategies as well for your specific event. But I would say that is the greatest challenge that I see.
Yeah, no, I'm sure in other challenges will come up and throughout our discussion today, but that those are definitely, I feel like I'm with you, that's another one that people always want to know how to raise more money, and that usually comes down to that during event impact they're going for. Well, I'm thinking talking about that first point we kind of laid out in the beginning about how to even get started with planning your fundraiser. I know I mentioned it with the biggest challenge about why. I think that's so important, is deciding your why for your fundraiser, but then it's also talking about who are you targeting with your fundraiser? You know, Mary, to your point of like empty butts and seats, or is it just a butt and a seat versus a donor? There are very different things you could do from an event perspective if you're targeting, you know, all your big donors, or if you're targeting, you know, just trying to get as many new donors as possible. You know, those could be two very different things. So understanding, once you know your why, then really breaking down your who are you targeting? And you can target multiple people for an event. But again, you can keep going back to that episode 2 was so helpful, just to know that you might sometimes find conflict then trying to make too many people happy, and you might need to just cater it to one person for this specific fundraising event, and then create a whole nother one that is a little bit more targeted at that audience. Not saying you wouldn't get overlap of people wanting to go to the event, but it will help you be more efficient and hopefully solve that challenge, like you mentioned, of getting people to donate.
Right. Yeah. And I want to echo what you said too about the who, because a lot of the thought process is figuring out if your event is going to be a Friendraiser or a fundraiser, because there's value to each of those. For example, a Friendraiser, it gets your name out there. Your ROI might not be as good. Like, for an example, I did an event that was classified as a Friendraiser. It had a lot of people come. Our ROI was about 70%, which isn't amazing, but we really were able to get our mission out there, and the goal was fundraising, and that's what happened. So I think there's value to that, deciding on which one you're going for. Of course, your budget, that should happen sooner than later. I think that's part of the beginning strategy, which once again also goes back to your why. And then, of course, once you can nail down the date of your event, so you can start working on your timeline, you can also start making sponsorship asks, which are so important for fundraisers. And so the sooner that you can do that, the better. You don't have to have everything hashed out, of course, but the sooner you have those key little bits of information, you can start making asks to sponsors and to speakers and get that firm down sooner than later, which then brings early engagements as well. Save the dates and things like that. So it is kind of a lot of pre-work, but once you have those key points, it's really going to set you up for success as you plan the rest of your fundraiser.
And Mary, I do want to jump in. Do you mind just laying out exactly what is a Friendraiser versus what is a fundraiser? Just to set it for members of the audience, maybe you're like me, you haven't necessarily heard those terms thrown around and you're looking for something different, but want to know how to talk about it to your organization.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so a fundraiser is something where, well, think about any relationships that you have in your life. You want to build that relationship. And so a fundraiser is a way that you can build relationships with an audience. So maybe they are your donors, or maybe they're people who you would like to be your donors. But it gives you an opportunity to make that connection in an event form, basically. So when you're planning that, because you might not be as familiar with who they are, you can't necessarily guarantee that you are going to raise a certain amount of money. That's hard to guarantee ever, but just because you're not familiar with them, it makes it a little more difficult. And so some people will focus on fundraisers because it builds it builds awareness for their organization. So that's kind of the purpose of a fundraiser. It might not raise a lot of money, but it'll build awareness. And so the importance, though, truly of that is like you need to, it's like how you get business, kind of, if you're not speaking specifically about nonprofits, but like if you're an event planner or contractor, freelancer, how do you get business? It's sort of similar. You know, you want to get your name out there, and that's basically what a fundraiser is. And then a fundraiser is, you know, what most people do know. It's where you invite your donors, sometimes other people as well, but the true intent is really to raise money for your cause. It's a little more fundraising focused, I would say. So hopefully that clears it up. Yeah.
Is it fun raising?
It's fun.
It's really fun.
I saw a sign once that said nonprofits just want to have funds.
Ooh,
FUNDS. I liked it. I felt like it was
gosh.
fun.
Gosh, I feel like I want to throw up a better events pun alert, but it's not a pun about better. It's a pun about fundraising. We're just gonna let that go. Love it. So yeah, let's kind of moving on. Just for like, what, Mary, from your experience, like what kind of fundraiser should a nonprofit even be looking to do? We talked about the Friendraiser and the fundraiser, but how would you break that down even more?
Yeah, so there's of course different kinds, and so there could be like a gala, which is like an auction, or a luncheon, a walkathon, a golf tournament. I'm trying to think of like the big things that are pretty common. But or you could do something random, like I've mentioned it before in some of our other episodes, but I like to call them boutique fundraisers. So they're just kind of totally unique. It's something new, doesn't fall under one of those categories, but the goal is still to raise money or raise friends. So, so yeah, that's what I would say, that those are the main different types that I would identify. But the best way to figure out which one you should do is to look at your audience, look at your donors. What types of events would they be likely to go to? Are they traditional? That means that they might enjoy like a gala more because that's a very traditional fundraiser. Or are they business professionals? If they are, then that means they might enjoy a luncheon better because it's during their lunch break, and that usually targets those business professionals. Or maybe they're very family focused, and so they might like a walkathon or something like that on a weekend. But this same question applies to a lot of your event planning process. Like that's also how you can determine your price point. So, so really focusing in on who your donor is and who your audience is as well. And I also will say that if you've done the same event for like 20 years, because a lot of organizations have, and a lot of them are typically like those gala auction types of events. They've done them for a long time, and that's fine. You know, if it works, that's super wonderful. But your organization, you really need to ask yourself, is this working? Should we be doing this again? And once again, I feel like we're going to reference this whole episode, but was what we talked about before in episode 2, which is your why. So should we do this event again? I think tradition is important, especially because if your donors enjoy that experience, then it's valuable. But just please, please, please look at your ROI every year and ask yourself, does that make sense for you and your audience? Do you want to grow your audience? Maybe you need to add something different, or maybe you need to modify your event in some way.
Yeah, and I'd like to just jump in on that, of like how important it is to look at ROI, but I know there's other, making sure you look at the data, but then I also do value like anecdotal feedback, because I think it's so important. ROI, sometimes it could be, raising more money, but it could also mean being more efficient with your expenses. And that, those different examples you gave, Mary, have different costs associated with them, and, different ways that you might have to figure out how to cover just the expenses of just even doing the event. And so something I always like to also challenge nonprofit clients to look at is the anecdotal feedback they get. Like, what was the most memorable thing from attendees, or what did they most enjoy? And starting to keep track and keep record of those, whether it's sending an actual survey via an email, or you had a videographer there who got sound bites, or even just listening and seeing what kind of feedback you have people coming. If you have a board, what are they buzzing about? And that can really help you keeping track of that, so that next year when you get back into that planning process, you're not like, oh yeah, what were people wondering about? Like doing a post-event report and putting that all the data in addition to the anecdotes in can be really helpful in helping you figure out, what worked, what could be improved. You keep with that format. It was over here. On the podcast, you can't see me, but I was like, when Mary said people do things 20 years in a row, I'm like, oh gosh, it's so frustrating. I'm shaking my fist over here. Just because I think a lot of people repeat what they do because in their minds it's worked, and they haven't taken time to really like think through or reevaluate. Is it what our current donors love? Is it really effective to what we're doing right now? And so I think thinking about what kind of fundraiser, and like being in current COVID times and having to do virtual, a virtual fundraiser, I think has been a great stretch for a lot of nonprofits to try to figure out and just try it in ways that pre-COVID they would just not want to, because it's an added cost and you don't know if it's going to work. And we've seen some really cool galas done online. We've even seen, like, I would add to your list, Mary, also just like I don't know if you just say virtual event, but even just like a webinar of some form, or like, it's a panel discussion, but there's a donation element that you could donate to the organization that one of the speakers is from. And the ability of these platforms that have come up that make it really easy to reach more donors. And again, coming back to your why, if this is actually a goal of yours, but I think that's another like tool to have in your fundraising tool belt, to know that you could do some of these events virtually and not even have to worry about a physical space. But you still would need all those details that you mentioned of date and who and all of that.
Yeah, I love the idea that you said about doing the survey, or just the other types of data that you can receive post-event. Something else that you can also do too is when you're trying to figure out what event to do like that year, your donors love to give you feedback. They support you for a reason. And so you might as well reach out to them and ask them what kind of events they would want to go to that year. There's absolutely no harm in that. And they will probably share with you, which that alone just like removes a lot of the questions because they'll tell you. So that's really helpful as well. So I love that idea and I'm glad you brought it up. And just to end also on this point with a quick idea, I was chatting with a fellow fundraising professional. He's an executive director for a local organization, and he said that he likes to look at events in a trilogy of 3, and I thought that was interesting. He said, try an event for 3 years, the same event each year, because it takes some time to get people used to your event and work out some of the kinks as time goes on. So by year 3, you're like really kicking it with that event. You know what you're doing. It's more solid now. And so then when year 4 comes along, you can start wrapping the event up like with a bow. So that doesn't mean ending it necessarily, but modifying it. That's where you can start changing the theme or the venue or something that keeps it fresh, but it's an established event by then. So it can sustain any modifications that you do make. And that's not like set in stone or anything. I just thought that was an interesting perspective. And so I wanted to share it because I liked the idea.
Oh, I love that. That's like super helpful. Especially when you're thinking about, how long do you need to try something new for it to feel like it worked? But then I do like the idea of them being able to put a bow on it. Cause I think I just feel that certain kinds of fundraisers are definitely just like again and again and again. And some are great, but also some are just, you're doing it cause that's what you think you're supposed to be doing versus really thinking about your who and how you engage them. Moving on to kind of our third point that we wanted to make here was talking about strategies that you can implement during your event to maximize those funds raised. And Mary, I love it. Some good old hearts touched.
Yes.
Because that's really what it's all about. And I know we touched on it in our episode 2 about why, but one of the things of strategies to implement during your event. So I'm interpreting this, Mary, as during could even be during your process of planning. Because one of the big things is marketing. And not necessarily, there's marketing comes in so many different ways. And more of what we're doing now, a marketer is really kind of like a content marketer. You're not just marketing you should buy tickets, but you're really also marketing like the experience, the message back to that why, and mixing it up and doing different things and not just having a standard, like, here's our save the date, come join our event. And then you just keep sending out that same message, just like slightly reworded, really thinking through like, what are these reasons of who you're targeting? And this is where you can apply to multiple different people. You can send a different email to the people who came to your event last year than people that are just on your general listserv. You can incentivize with different things and start to like cater your message to your audience. And that's one that I've seen is very effective. Instead of trying to cater the event to too many different people, but you can cater the messaging around the event to different people. Just like maybe the people who were your donors last year, they loved the dessert dash and you're going to do a dessert dash again. You're going to play that up. Who's the sponsor for this year's dessert dash? But to a new person, maybe you're playing up your why and your message and what speakers are going to be there to tell more about the reason that you're there. So I think that marketing, but thinking it less as like ticket sales and more as content marketing will really help you maximize your funds. Mary, what are your strategies you like to implement?
Yeah, well, I love those, first of all. And I think there's so many different things that we can do. I made a little list and I'm just going to like throw them out there really quick. And if we want to talk further about any specifically, we totally can. But so just some things I thought about, ways to maximize funds raised. So you can have a good video. I do think there's value in that video that helps sets up your ask. So my note for that, it would be to make sure you pay for it. It is worth the money. Now, maybe you have somebody in your circle who is really good at making those videos for you. And if so, that's great. And you're super lucky, but just don't be afraid to make that a line item on your budget because the video is just super important. Something else I would say is to keep your program concise. This is super true for virtual events, but also for in-person. Just keep it short and sweet and yeah, there's lots I could say about that, like short and sweet. Prime the pump. So if it's an auction or you're making some type of specific ask, dessert dashes, like Logan mentioned, those are super good ways, just little things you can do to get people excited to give, basically. Little ways to engage them in the event.
Yeah, and I think on that with the virtual lens, and you mentioned it earlier, but like how you can prime the pump weeks in advance now in the virtual world. And I'm hoping that's an element that will stick around even with in person, because it is a great way. Like, you can open your silent auction in the week or 2 weeks ahead of your event. And back to my earlier point about content marketing, you can then tease those items in your content marketing, trying to get people to sign up for your event. It's also a great way to engage people who might not be able to attend, like an in-person only event prior to COVID. I think people would be like, oh, I can't go, maybe I'll donate, maybe I won't. But this is a way you could start to engage them. They could still donate on items and still be a part of some of the interaction that they probably love from your in-person event, even if they can't make it. So thinking about whether you're doing a virtual or even an in-person or a hybrid, like thinking about that there's no rule that says your silent auction can only be open during your event, and how you can think strategically, whether we had a client that Mary and I worked with, that they dribbled them out little by little. So it was like a couple items, and then they waited a couple days, and then it was another couple items. And it was really fun because they had people getting into bidding wars before the event had even started. So it was a great, they're already talking about your event, which is what every event organizer dreams of. So I think that's definitely an easy way to help increase your funds the night of.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because with those auction items, whether it's virtual or in person or whatever, there's lots of items that you can create that are of no cost to you. And I'm not just talking about like board members going out and securing things, which is important, but also like think about your specific organization and things that are unique to you. So that might be like a privately catered dinner at your farm, or something that's just, it isn't going to cost you anything because you can get that piece donated, if that makes sense, but it's on your location. And so anything that you can use, whether you have a physical location or if it like really surrounds your mission, really dive deep down into those experiences, those experience auction items, because those are what are going to bring the money in, definitely, because they're closer to your mission.
Yeah. And pro tip with experiences, because we are living in a pandemic world, or hopefully we're in a post-pandemic world, maybe when you're listening to this, having expiration dates on some of those things. I know in previous years, that's been something like we've always looked out for as organizers, of what's the expiration date on the experience or the ticket or something. And that's a trend since with COVID that a lot of people have either been making them open-ended or extending it for several years instead of just a year. And I think that's a trend that will continue. So if you're an organizer, whether you're creating these experiences, like Mary said, that's a fabulous idea. But also if you're procuring them from places, just really paying attention to that, because we don't know what the world's going to look like as we open back up, but that'll definitely increase the power of these experiences. Because Mary, I would kill for a privately catered dinner on a farm right now. Like I would love that. That would be great. Maybe because we haven't seen that many people that often, but I think those kind of things are really still going to be your big ticket items when you're doing fundraising, whether it's virtually or back in person again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And just a few more quick items. So get sponsorship. I feel like that speaks for itself, but that's really going to help set your event up for success beforehand. Secure gifts beforehand. So talk to some of your donors who are probably going to give at the event, and just invite them ahead of time to actually do it at the event. That will entice other people to give as well, but it'll also give you peace of mind because you're setting yourself up for success, and you're asking that of your donors who you have a really close relationship with. And so it's not going to come as a surprise to them. It's just going to kind of secure that. So another thing that you can do along those same lines is set up a match. That could be the sponsor or a donor or maybe like an outside third party. But if you set that match up beforehand and you talk about it during the event or even before the event and it's part of your marketing, that's also enticing to get people to give. And the last thing that I want to touch on is on how to pull at those heartstrings. So let's say your event, you watch that video at the end and it really touches your heartstrings. Then you make that strong ask. And then with all due respect, shut up. Don't say anything after that. Let people feel the moment and then close your event, or do what you need to do, but don't stay up there and keep talking because they've felt it. You've made the ask. Now let them give. And I think asking for money is scary sometimes. And so we keep talking, but just let them be in that moment. And I think that's where you're going to find a lot of success and a lot of donations given during that time.
Yeah, and I think the last one of strategies to implement for your event, really maximize funds. I come from a production background more than a nonprofit one, but thinking about keeping it entertaining. And like we said, Mary said, keep it concise, but I think you can keep it concise while adding some entertainment values because you are pulling on those heartstrings. You are You are asking, but if your whole event program is just like an ask and ask and ask, a pull on the heartstrings and ask, you're going to burn, like people will tune you out. And so I think thinking through like where are those moments, not necessarily of levity, maybe it's, but things that tie into your why that could be seen more as a little bit of an entertainment value, whether it's a performance or a dance or a something that like adds to it, that I think will directly, you might say, wouldn't raise you more money, but I think it really does, because it gives your donors a break. And like Mary's saying, to end your video, and then maybe you have a musical performance that's on theme and heartfelt, and it's a strings or something, an orchestral performance or something like that's, that would still do what you're accomplishing without you asking for more money. But the big misses I've seen before with clients is if you walk away feeling like all they did was ask you for money 7 different ways, and that's the only thing you're taking away, you're missing the mark, and you might need to figure out a better balance of that ask and the education or the celebration or whatever else that is happening at your fundraiser.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. Thank you. That's a fabulous point. I'm glad we didn't forget about that. So thank you.
Yeah. And then this one, Mary, I'm so excited about this last one. I'm going to ask you about it. Are fundraising events the best way to raise money?
Okay, so this is a controversial question. I feel like it is, at least. I've asked myself this many times, and I've heard others in the fundraising community asking this as well. So I wish I could tell you that I have like these deep thoughts about it, but I really don't. I don't think that there is an end all be all. I don't think that there's a right answer to it, but I think it comes down to what works for your organization. Maybe your organization doesn't have a lot of people who would come to an event, but you have some major gift officers that are just rocking it, and they're bringing in the donations that way. And that's what's going to work for your organization. So it just comes down to your organization, what works for you, your donors, your audience. You know what's best. So just continue doing your best to serve your mission and serve your local communities as well. So I wish Logan, I could get deeper into it, but I think it really just depends. And I don't want anyone to be influenced based on what they hear about that, because it's up to you.
Yeah, I think, going back to it, fundraising can look many different ways. There's not one way to do it right, and you're the only one who's really going to understand your audience. And if you don't, maybe that's when you need to engage with someone who helps specialize in nonprofit fundraising events, like Mary here, or somebody else who just can help guide you through those questions. And I think you're so right of, if you know your who, you're going to figure it out. But it also, to me, comes back to, again, logistic brain, like your post-event report. If you do a fundraising event, make sure you write something down of what happened after the fact. And whether it's just keeping a track of the ROI, keeping track of anecdotal data, screenshots of something, whatever it is, but have some document. Because also another thing I see with nonprofits is sometimes if they're volunteer run, or they just have different people doing different events, it's helpful to have somewhere like a master like post-mortem that kind of tells you all the things that happened. Because I always say when I get brought in by a nonprofit to help run an event, the first thing I look for is the data and information of what happened last year, and if it's something they've done more than once, what happened the year before that too. So I think you can also help answer that question for yourself of, are fundraising events the best way to raise money for your organization? But you really can only do that by knowing and having some of that data if you have tried events before, or if you're someone who's never even tried an event, start going to ones and seeing, hey, would this resonate with who you're targeting with your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. So if you have thoughts on if fundraisers are the best way to raise money, send us an email. Our email will be in the show notes, but it's bettereventspod@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about that and any future topic suggestions that you have as well.
Yeah, and I think before we wrap up, I do know we can kind of shout out a couple of our favorite virtual event fundraising platforms right now. It is something that is constantly changing. So at the time of this recording, I would say just a couple that come to my mind are Octria and Pledgeling. Octria, I think, is it's got a set fee for your fundraiser, and so it doesn't nickel and dime you on some of the costs depending on what you're raising. Pledgeling, I think, is super cool if you have a very mobile friendly donor base. Doesn't work really if you're going for offline donations, but they have a really cool overlay that works with Zoom that will show your progress with your fundraiser and live time show you if people donate or not. And so that's a super easy way to get a visual of how much you're raising onto your live stream. Mary, what are some of your favorite virtual event fundraising platforms?
Yeah, well, like Logan said, there are really so many out there. I like One Cause. It's very robust. It's also one of the not so cheap. I don't want to say that.
Let's say
it's,
affordable, Mary.
it's
It's not one of the more affordable options. It's a lower
yes,
budget or higher budget.
yes. I like One Cause. It's not as affordable, but it's very robust, and so that is a good one. If you're going to be doing multiple events every year, I think that would be worth it. Greater Giving is good with their recent update that they did. I think it was in November of 2020 with their new engagement center. So I really enjoy that as well. Once again, it's a little more pricey, but then there's things, there are so many out there, and I'm sure that they will serve you well. Another one that I like, which is very affordable, I would say, is Charity Auctions Today for an online silent auction. It just depends. Feel free to reach out though if you ever want recommendations. It's like Logan said, it's always changing. So we're happy to help.
Yeah. Well, Mary, you want to kind of wrap us up with what were our key takeaways from everything we've talked about today when it comes to fundraising for nonprofit events?
Yeah, well, we've talked about lots of goodies today, and the basic strategies to utilize when planning your fundraising events. Everything from how to get started planning your fundraiser, what kind of fundraisers to do, strategies to implement during or before your event to maximize your success, and then also if fundraising events are the best way to raise money. So thank you so much for joining us. And
I'm going to jump in with our bonus tip before we cut it off. This bonus tip for this week's episode is related to what we were just talking about when it comes to fundraising platforms. And again, logistics brain Logan here talking. It's all about the fees when it comes to fundraising platforms. So we mentioned a couple of our favorites earlier, but really do your homework when you're looking at a virtual fundraising platform and know ahead of time what fees you're going to be charged. Some platforms, it's a flat rate fee and they don't care how many donors you have or how much money you raise. Others, it's a percentage of the funds raised. Others, it's sometimes calculated based on the number of donors you have. There's also credit card fees associated. Usually that's separate from a platform fee. And then there's also, for a lot of these that have that online component, and I noticed it in person, there was an additional cost for having someone associated with the platform to be at your physical event and help run that technology. And the same thing speaks for virtual fundraisers. It's usually an added cost for having someone from the platform to do it. Mary and I can speak from experience. Sometimes it's helpful to have someone from the platform be that person, but other times you could train someone on your team or your event staff could handle doing it on their own. It's up to you and up to kind of whatever budget. But I have seen those additional costs be anywhere of upwards to like $1,500 a day to have one person help you. So that's our bonus tip. Think about your fundraising platform fees. That'll save you a lot of time down the road and hopefully some money. But that's all we have for you guys this week. Thanks for listening. And you can find us at our Better Events Pod Instagram and our email linked below that Mary referenced. And we'll be back talking with you again, talking about better events, how we all believe we can host, attend, and create better and more fun events. We'll see you next Wednesday.